Chapter 60. Wrinkles from the Wine 2. Her departure also caused the companions beside her to have confused expressions. Xu Qing didn't pay attention to these. He stared at the jellyfish that were pouncing over and calculated the time. After that, he stood there as the blood and chi in his body suddenly erupted. He then opened his mouth and let out a roar at the jellyfish that was approaching. As his blood chest swelled and the mountains and seas art circulated, the Kui's shadow immediately manifested behind him. Just like him, it let out a roar. The figure was sinister looking with a single horn on its head. Its entire body was pitch black and it looked as though it had crawled out of the netherworld. Purple light could be seen flickering faintly in its eyes, making it look bizarre and astonishing. Its roar was soundless, but when combined with Xu Qing's roar, it seemed to contain astonishing intimidation, causing the jellyfish that were pouncing over to stop in their tracks. All their eyes opened and stared fixedly at Xu Qing. They weren't the only ones who were intimidated. The expressions of the young men and women behind Xu Qing also turned pale at this instant. When they saw the shadow behind Xu Qing, their eyes narrowed. Blood-chet shadow formation. This is a phenomenon that only appears when one's body temperament has reached the great circle of perfection. Shock surged intensely in their hearts. Those jellyfish could sense Xu Qing's savageness. In addition, his poison had taken effect at this moment, causing the aura from everyone's blood to dissipate. Hence, after the solemn confrontation, those jellyfish slowly retreated and left rapidly through the entrance. Watching the jellyfish's departing figure, Xu Qing heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. He then turned around and stared coldly at the group of youths. What he focused on was the place where the woman in gloves was previously. He didn't see it. Xu Qing narrowed his eyes. At the same time, as his gaze swept across the crowd, a few young girls among them were so frightened that they started crying. The current Xu Qing looked extremely murderous. Under the moonlight, his entire body was covered in blue blood. The coldness in his eyes made him feel as though he had just walked out of hell. Coupled with the Kui shadow behind him, he looked like a malicious ghost. Only the youth's surname by forcefully suppressed the reverence in his heart and cupped his fists toward Xu Qing. Im Bai Yun Dong. Thank you for your help, my friend. We will definitely repay your kindness. As though he had noticed what Xu Qing was looking at earlier, Bai Yun Dong took a deep breath and explained. The one who teleported away was Li Ruolin. Her family is skilled in array formations, so the life-saving item they gave her was a teleportation talisman. It would allow her to escape danger at any time. You guys don't have one. Xu Qing looked at Bai Yun Dong. Bai Yun Dong smiled bitterly and the youths beside him fell silent as well. Although we're from a large purple earth family, we aren't direct descendants. We're just fresh on the surface. Xu Qing nodded and tossed the sword in his hand to Bai Yun Dong. As the other youths thanked him, he looked at Bai Yun Dong and suddenly asked, "Who is grandmother Bai to you?" "That's my third grandfather." Bai Yun Dong was stunned. After answering, he asked another question. "You know my third grandfather?" Xu Qing cast a deep glance at him and nodded without saying anything. He then turned and looked at the entrance of the canyon before glancing at the sky. The anomalous substances here are very dense. We can't stay here for long. I'll send you out of here. After he finished speaking, Xu Qing walked toward the entrance of the canyon. Bai Yun Dong hesitated for a moment before he gritted his teeth and followed. The other young men and women also knew the pros and cons, so they followed him one after another. Hence, the group of youths walked out of the canyon and sped toward the edge of the jungle in the darkness. Although they were in a sorry state when facing the jellyfish, everyone had a cultivation base. After experiencing this life and death battle, it was a transformation for them. Hence, on the road at night, few people spoke. They all silently followed Xu Qing. Even though a few of the girls didn't have much stamina left, they gritted their teeth and persevered. Just like that, the group of them walked for an entire night. Finally, at dawn, he saw the world outside the jungle from afar. Waves of excitement rose and fell in their hearts, and their exhausted bodies seemed to have the strength to spare. A whistling sound could be heard from afar. Xu Qing immediately looked over warily and saw three figures whistling over from the sky. They were the experts beside the group of youths. Xu Qing's previous judgment wasn't wrong. They were the ones who had lured away the largest jellyfish. At that moment, it was obvious that they had suffered some casualties. After they arrived, amidst the exciting narration of the youths, they cast a deep glance at Xu Qing. Xu Qing was vigilant and kept a certain distance from them. He then took the poison powder without leaving a trace. These three experts didn't approach Xu Qing. Instead, they nodded at him and led the way. Although this place didn't seem to be far from the outside world, the group still only walked out when it was almost noon. When the group of young men and women walked out of the jungle and stepped into the outside world, everyone who had survived the calamity could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts. Many of them started crying. Xu Qing was the last to walk out. He looked at these people from afar and didn't speak. Very soon, the group of youths led by Yundong arrived at Xu Qing's place. After they cupped their fists and thanked him sincerely, they introduced themselves. "We came here to train at the last minute. Right now, we don't have anything too valuable on us and we've used up everything in the Forbidden Zone. Also, because the anomalous substances in our bodies are very dense, we have to return to Purple or through the teleportation array in the nearby cities as soon as possible. We won't forget your great kindness. This sword is for you." Yundong bowed deeply and left his sword behind. Xu Qing watched them leave and picked up the shark sword. This sword was filled with orchids and gleamed with a cold light. Although it had killed many jellyfish and tainted them with anomalous substances, it wasn't damaged at all. When one looked at it, one could sense the icy intent on it. It could be considered a top-rate treasure among treasures. Although it was a little long and not as convenient as the dagger, Xu Qing was still somewhat comfortable with using it previously. Hence, he wrapped it and hid the sharp edge behind his back. Looking at the sky, Xu Qing walked toward the campsite. He prepared to go back and buy a few daggers. After a few days, when the jellyfish swarm completely disappeared, he would head to the Forbidden Zone. After noon, as the afternoon sun shone lazily, Xu Qing arrived at the campsite. However, he only took a few steps before he frowned slightly. He felt that there was something wrong with the campsite. There were now some strangers at the campsite. As for the scavengers in the surroundings, their expressions were a little strange when they saw him. One of them was also someone he had saved back then. After seeing Xu Qing, he wanted to say something but hesitated. Although he didn't speak, he subtly pointed in the direction of Xu Qing's residence. Xu Qing's heart skipped a beat. As he observed his surroundings, he quickened his pace. When he arrived at his residence, he immediately sensed many gazes on him, coldly staring at him. Xu Qing immediately recognized the owners of these gazes from their clothes. They were all guards from the camp leader's residence. At the entrance of an alley not far away, the man with the three-stroke beard under the camp leader smiled coldly at him. Xu Qing narrowed his eyes and pushed open the gate to the courtyard. He saw Cross sitting there with an extremely unsightly countenance, as well as Lu One Tooth, who seemed to be heavily injured and weak. The instant Xu Qing walked in, the two of them abruptly looked toward him. "Kid, Captain Lei is in trouble." Cross' right hand was simply bandaged and was still trembling at the moment. After seeing Xu Qing, he spoke in a low voice and coughed violently as he spat out a mouthful of blood. When these words landed in Xu Qing's ears, it was like a bolt of lightning had struck. As the rumbling echoed, his heart instantly tensed up and his breathing grew hurried. His heartbeat involuntarily sped up and his body stiffened a little. The bad premonition instantly erupted, transforming into an extremely dense and astonishing baleful aura that rose uncontrollably from Xu Qing's body. Even the surrounding temperature seemed to have turned cold. What happened? Amidst the coldness, an even more bone-chilling voice that trembled slightly rang out from Xu Qing's mouth.